Hello, welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. Many of us have been active feminists since the 1970s or even the 1960s. We were not surprised when this new attack on women came along, and we have not changed our analysis. In 2018, we wrote a declaration on women's sex-based rights, which lays out our position. It has been signed by nearly 40,000 people from 160 countries and is supported by 547 organizations. To promote the declaration and sex-based rights for women, we have volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent. Please join us. You can also become a member of WDI to help our work by volunteering or donating. You can contact info@womensdeclaration.com or your country contact, which you can find on the website, which is womensdeclaration.com. I'm Kara Dansky. I'm a former president of the US chapter of WDI, and I wanted to start this webinar by saying a few quick words about the recent decision in United States versus Skermeti. On the whole, this is a win for sex-based rights. In the case, Tennessee had enacted a law to protect minors from puberty blockers and opposite-sex hormones. A group of minors and their parents sued the state, whose attorney general is named Skermeti, which is why his name is involved in the case. The minors and their parents were represented by the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, where I used to work. They won at the lowest court level, but they lost on appeal, where the Court of Appeals issued a very strong ruling in favor of the state, and where WDI USA had filed a friend of the court brief. The United States government got involved in the case on the side of the minors and the ACLU, and both the United States government and the ACLU asked the Supreme Court to take the case, which it did. The US chapter of WDI filed its first substantive Supreme Court friend of the court brief in the case, asking the Supreme Court to affirm the Court of Appeals. It did, so that's really good. However, the court did not go as far as we wanted it to go. It did not rule unambiguously that sex is real or that trans is not a coherent category, which is what we wanted it to do. The US chapter will be hosting a webinar later today at 4 o'clock New York time to explain the case in detail. I'll be there with Elizabeth Chesick, who is the current president of the US chapter and the coordinator of the Detransitioned and Desisted Women's Caucus. We'll be joined by two women who once took testosterone and had their breasts removed, but have since come to accept themselves as the women that they are. I realize 4 o'clock New York time is not convenient for anyone who is not in North or South America, but the webinar will be recorded. So today our program will be Cynthia Millen, who will talk about the sports issue. Then we will have Irene Lawrence from WDI USA's board, Sharon Byrne from the Women's Liberation Front, Arianne Gieringer, I hope I'm saying that right, with LGB Alliance USA, and Dr. Liz Fedak with ROAR NYC. And they will be talking about recent visits to congressional offices where they lobbied on May 19th and 20th. Cynthia Millen, she's a 30-year international and NCAA swimming official and a former NCAA athlete. And she will be talking about how in the sports issue, we're basically going one step forward, two steps back.
This is a very fragmented issue, partially because of the way that our government is set up. We have localities, states, federal government in the United States, and there are various world organizations that handle different parts of sports. So we have world organizations, we have high school, we have club, we have NC2A, we have private leagues. Literally, there are hundreds of different organizations that are dealing with this. So it's not been a unified fight to keep males out of female sports. It's been more like what we call whack-a-mole. You hit one and you hit the other, and then something else pops up. So that's why we say one step forward, two step back. The general direction, however, has been good. And I provided 3 papers, and there'll be links provided at the end of the talk which will give you a deeper dive because there's so much here that it's hard to talk about all of it. But I wanted to touch on the subjects of the 3 papers and especially to attack the fallacies that have been used to promote males in female sports. And the first is that we often hear, especially among governmental people, representatives, is that, oh, there's so few males in female sports. This is just a tiny percentage. Why are you worrying about it? Well, there's a paper, and there's other papers as well. There are literally thousands of males who are or who have been participating in sports, in female sports, and those are only the ones that have been reported of all ages. And this is a serious problem. And it is a fallacy to think that it's just a small problem. It is not. And it's from grade school age all the way to older adults. Okay. Secondly, why has no one sued on this? Well, literally, there are many lawsuits that have been filed. And again, because of the nature of the sporting world, there's bits and pieces. So we have athletes who are suing, and I'm sure Kara can talk about this better than I can. Athletes who have been suing. There have been parents of athletes who have been suing for minors. There have been organizations that have been suing, and it's frustrating because it's so fragmented. But again, the overall motion is good towards protecting women. I mean, you've got legal issues pertaining to girls who have been denied scholarships because of male participation in sports. You have the huge issue of the right of privacy, which many different groups have been suing on. And again, these are trickling up through the state level, the local level, and eventually I think it will be at the federal level. But again, it's still very, very fragmented, but there are suits that are happening. Sadly, the burden has been put on the athletes. And the athletes, I got involved when it was in 2021, when William Thomas decided to compete as a female in Akron, Ohio, at a swim meet. He was representing the University of Pennsylvania, allowed to compete, wiped out all the records. And we in Ohio became aware of that. That was before he went on and swam at NC2A championships in 2022. And we were appalled that this was happening. Why didn't the referees stop the meet? Why didn't the adults in the room stop the meet? But again, because of the time, he was allowed to compete as a woman. And after that, you would have thought that the NC2A would have stopped it, obviously seeing the obvious unfairness of it all, and they did not. So it's been taking a while for all of this to trickle up, and for the kind of lawsuits that are being filed, they're taking a while to get processed. Okay, and then finally, what are sports organizations doing? And that's the third paper. This paper basically grades all the different sports organizations. There's some that aren't in there, but most of them are. And it's a sport by sport list, and it gives you websites that you can go to if you're interested in a particular sport. When I played lacrosse, before Title IX, it was so clear that women were treated unfairly, and I don't have to go into that, but you all know how women did not have the same advantages, support as men did. Then finally, after Title IX, they did get that support, and now it's so frustrating as a former athlete that it's being destroyed, and I'm sure a lot of you have experiences with that. There is the gold standard. That is when a sports organization will say only biological females can compete in female sports, period. And this brought up another fallacy that, oh my gosh, they'll be looking at athletes' genitals to see if they're female or male. No, all you need is a swab of spit from your cheek, and that that will determine whether you have XY chromosomes or not, right? And the sports organizations, a few of them have done this. Many organizations, including the NC2A, very sad, are still using inept or bogus criteria. NC2A right now is saying whatever is on your birth certificate. Well, we all know that in the majority of states in the United States, you can change your birth certificate, right? So that's not helpful at all. Others, like USA Swimming, say that, well, if you transitioned before puberty, then you are that sex. Again, we all know, and the science has proven, that males have an advantage over females from the time they're born. They don't even have to go through puberty. That's why, just speaking swimming wise, we have categories of age and sex, because an 8 and under boy is going to typically win over an 8 and under girl, right? I love the statistic that Katie Ledecky, God bless her, has come out and said that, you know, she's won more Olympic gold medals than any athlete, yet she would not even make the Olympic team on a male team, right? So you just have the idea of the disparity here. Others are still relying on we'll lower the testosterone level, right? And then magically the male becomes a female. Well, we all know that's not true. I mean, William Thomas lowered his testosterone, and the testosterone levels that they're lowering to, right, are still way higher than any woman could ever achieve. As a matter of fact, if a woman doped herself up to that hormone level, she would be banned from the sport for doping. So we're getting some organizations that are changing, you know, and typically in the US, if a world organization makes a change, then the US will follow suit. But it's still slow going. And it's so frustrating because while this problem's been going on for a long time, it really came to a head with William Thomas and the NC2A. Well, then why, when it's so obvious to everybody that males don't deserve to be in women's sports, don't deserve to be in women's locker room, it's not only a fairness issue, but it's a safety issue, why is this dragging on so long? Well, you can guess, money. There is lots and lots of money in gender affirming care. The larger hospitals want to keep the gravy train growing, and they are very powerful, and they have large corporate support. For example, here in Ohio, which is generally a very conservative state, the legislature passed a bill which banned males from female sports and banned gender affirming care for minors, right? Very well supported bill. I mean, even some Democrats went for it, but it was not controversial. But Governor Mike DeWine, a Republican, went and talked to the powers that be at Nationwide Children's Hospital. There's one in Columbus and one in Cincinnati, huge nationwide system. And he vetoed the bill because he said he was concerned about the parents of these kids. Thankfully, it was passed over his veto, but Nationwide was also a huge donor to his campaign. And you have this throughout the entire company. Large corporations, for example, that support the NC2A, right? The NC2A president could have immediately said, wait a minute, William Thomas should not swim, he's a male, end of story. But he went along with it, right, until he said, oh, it's up to the government to pass the rule. No, the NCAA can pass their own rules. They don't need the government. And now they're following the stupid, you know, birth certificate rule. Transitioning is a gold mine for hospitals and for other organizations who are offering this gender affirming care. The other issue is we are too nice. And I think, you know, imagine, if you would, a female forcing her way into a male locker room or onto an all-male team. You know, she'd be kicked out right away. She'd be laughed off, and nobody would have any problem with it. We women, and I'm speaking for myself, and if this applies to you, then you, but only for myself, we've been gaslit by the entire transgender industry that we need to feel sorry for them. We need to be nice. We need to include them. Where will they play sports if they can't play on the women's team? You know, and well, find a co-ed team or go play with the men. But we've been so nice and afraid to say that. No, we are not denying access to your child. No, you cannot transition and become a woman. You know, and as a matter of fact, it's insulting to put on women face and to pretend that you're a woman. But we, and I'm speaking for myself, have been hesitant to say that. And I can remember, God bless Kara, the first time I saw Kara on the news where she said, no, we do not have to go along with the language. We do not have to pretend. We do not have to say transgender because there's no such thing as transgender. And she was right all along. So what can you do as an individual in your country, in your state? Find out what your state is doing. Find out what your locality is doing. I went and testified at the Ohio State House and in the Senate bill and in the lower house, and brought the facts with me and testified. Get involved. Don't afraid to speak out. Get involved in your locality. Get involved in your sport. Make sure that your sport is following the gold standard, and then we all will win. The other thing is we have to speak out about the gender affirming care. Mastectomy, those of you who have had it because of cancer, know it is not fun. It is not simple. No, you cannot get your breast back, right? What is being done for children is horrific. So don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid to not be nice. Thank you for this time. If anybody has any questions, I am honored to be here, and what WDI has been doing is fabulous. Thank you so much.
People will say, oh, it's only one or two. And as you point out, that is not true. Someone wrote an absolutely brilliant article. It spoke about the ripple effect of even allowing one male into female-only sports. It talked about the psychological impact of every single team member, female team member, the psychological impact of all of their family members, right? So even one male on a women's sports team or competing in a women's event has ripple effects that can be documented.
You know, Carrie, you touch on an issue. My girls swam, and the thing they loved the most was they were competing against themselves and they were swimming, but they loved being in the locker room with other girls. That's where they could talk about, oh, my breasts are getting bigger. Oh, I'm starting my period. Oh, how do you handle this? Oh, blah, blah, blah. That privacy is so important for girls. And you're right, one male would screw the whole thing up.
What does the NCAA actually have to say?
They have run away, and Riley Gaines, God bless her, has been like a hound dog on them, just, you know, chasing after them, talking to them, trying to get a meeting. They won't meet with her. They won't meet with any of the athletes who actually were screwed out of spots, right? Imagine swimming your whole life to get to NC2As and you don't make the final 8 because there's this guy in the first place, right? And they have been cowards. They have been cowards. So they haven't responded to any of this. And again, from what I've read, it's the corporate pressure. You know, the people who are Coca-Cola, the big corporations who are giving them money don't want the NC2A to come across as, again, being too mean. So they just refuse to meet with anybody.
Let's bring up Arianne, Irene, Sharon, and Liz, all of whom got together under the organization of Wolf to go lobby some of our sitting members of Congress, and they will report on how that went.
I'm Sharon, the executive director of Women's Liberation Front. And yeah, this was my idea, was that we need to get to Congress, because that is our lawmaking body in the United States. And we need to speak to power. Otherwise, whatever we're doing is really not going to go anywhere. We also wanted to make relationships with congressional reps, because you need, I will say this from working for other political organizations before Women's Liberation Front, if you are not in relationship with Congress, if you're not speaking to them on a regular basis, if you are not a presence and asserting what you're looking for, then you get nowhere. I do have a presentation that goes with this, by the way. So I want to introduce the team here because, yeah, I had this idea, but I needed a team of women to go with me because there are like, I don't know, 500 congressional reps and not that many of us. So we needed to kind of spread the forces. So I reached out to Arianne, I reached out to Irene, reached out to Liz, women that I knew and trusted, that I knew could carry a strong message to congressional reps, the power, in our country, and that they would have thick enough skins, because politics is a full contact sport. You absolutely have to have a super thick skin for this. And they could speak on behalf of women and not make it about themselves. So you're looking at the team, and this was a great team. I have some thoughts in here that I want to share, but Liz had been on our board before. I've worked with Irene on a few things now, and really found her to be an excellent speaker. Arianne, I was new to, but immediately talking to her in the early part of this year, I was like, oh yeah, you're going to be very good for this. So, and it turns out Arianne turned out to be a surprise rock star on this thing. So anyway, when we started putting together the trip to DC, we needed two things: funding to pay for women to be able to stay in DC, because it is not the cheapest thing in the world. And then we also needed for people to book meetings with their congressional reps for us. So when you reach out to congressional reps, say, hey, I just want to talk to you, a lot of times they're going to blow you off unless you're well-moneyed, a high-powered lobbyist, et cetera. So we reached out to a lot of Women's Liberation Front supporters and said, could you book a meeting for us? Because they'll often talk to their constituents. And that's really important, is that a lot of times in the United States, they want to hear from their voters. They want to hear from the people that put them in office, not so much the lobbyists. So that was great. And actually we ended up with some really good meetings out of that. We were having sort of weekly meetings to get this call together and get women together, book the Airbnb, all of that. Then we had a really good problem to have, a very good problem, in my opinion. Too many women wanted to come on the trip after booking meetings with us. And so that's a great problem to have. So you're like, so I love Leah to death, and she's on this call right now. But Leah's idea of let's book an Airbnb is we're all going to sleep on the floor. And when I realized there was like 15 of us going to sleep on the floor, I'm like, no. So we had to go raise the money for a second Airbnb, and amazingly, the donors did it over literally overnight to pay for us to do that. So that was actually really cool. So a bunch of us congregated in New York. I'm sorry, in DC. It was in New York in March, and got ready for this trip. And we had certain talking points, and we had a strategy that we are going to try. Now, remember, America's a two-party system. You have to speak at the level people are at. That's speak at the level people are at. And so we knew that we were going to be meeting with majority Democrats, because most of our supporters are coming from the left and they're in the blue states. So that's sort of how this fell. But we had some Republicans in the mix too. And we had kind of two messaging streams for reps, depending on where they were. So if we were meeting with a Republican, this was a little bit easier, where Trump has issued some executive orders, and those executive orders protect against gender identity and the harms of it. And so the problem with executive orders, as we all know, is they can all be undone by the next administration. And so for 8 years, we've had this whipsaw back and forth, right? Where, somebody did executive orders, they were undone literally by the next administration. So if you don't codify them into law, you will be forever subject to this. And of course, the courts are blocking a lot of Trump's executive orders. So the job was to point to the Republican representatives, say, go write this legislation, go write this and put it into law. We were lucky some of that legislation had already been written by Nancy Mace and some other folks. And so we wanted to make sure that we met with them and got that done, really push that. Also, you got to remember, in Congress, it's not just enough to propose that legislation. You have to get allies to sign on to it. And the more sponsors there are on a bill, the better chances that bill has of passing. Then it's got to get debated on the floor. It's got to go through committees, all of that. So we knew there's a long legislative process. The other conversation we wanted to have with Republicans, and I'll spare this for another time, is you have a little problem in your pro-life ideology. And so there's a kind of like the way the left has set up a terrible collision between women's rights and LGBT rights and this transgender crap. The right has set up a similar collision, and it's with believing that life begins at conception, and then a whole bunch of brick walls that runs into. So I wanted to have that conversation with them because I wanted to get on the table, but the big important thing was go code the gender ideology laws into being. And for the most part, they were super responsive to that and willing to do it. And then actually, after we got back from DC, I called a few of those folks that we met with and said, hey, did you know that that guy is willing to sign on to your legislation? You should call him. And that woman's willing to be a sponsor. You should call them. So they're like, oh, I didn't know. So I'll call them. Now, when we were meeting with Democrats, the strategy was very different. And we had, again, this is a gamble, and I wasn't sure it was going to work, but thanks to Arianne and some of the women on the team, it worked really, really well. I decided that since the Democrats believe that they support LGBTQ. And we had researched our reps before meeting that we were all doing research. We were looking at their websites. We were, trying to see what they stood for. And on a lot of those websites, it really looked like this LGBTQ support was a tick box and not really that heartfelt. So I really felt like we should push against that. Just push against that. Let's test that. And to do that, I wanted to put the lesbians first. I wanted to center them in the conversation, and I wanted them to bring the message to these representatives. Hey, you say you support LGBTQ, but how does that support stand when you are actively harming one of those initials, L in particular? Like, how are you going to justify that you really, really, really care about that community when what you're doing is actively harming a big part of that group? So I had no idea that Arianne was going to be this master spokeswoman, and we tried this strategy. We ended up getting an extra meeting because I'll tell you this other story. We got canceled quite a bit, but we ended up getting this extra meeting with the California rep who was Democratic, and we got that meeting on Monday. Most of our meetings were supposed to happen on Tuesday and Wednesday, and so we thought, well, let's just try the strategy. So I led the conversation. It was like, okay, blah, 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 here's what we care about, and now I'm going to turn it over to Arianne and let her tell you, what happened to the lesbians. Woo! She was devastating. She had this very concise, measured, and deadly way of speaking. And basically what she did was she landed it that lesbians had no place to go, that they were being hounded out of their dating websites, that they were being not allowed to have any meeting spaces to themselves. And basically, sort of run out of, being overrun with transgenderism. And then she circled around and said, hey, it's not good what's happening to the kids. Read the latest Health and Human Services report that shows that transgender medicine is based on very, very flawed premises and is not well researched. And then she closed it with, do we believe that people should be discriminated against? And the answer is no. No. In employment law, in just living, whatever kind of conditions. And should a man who presents as feminine be fired? No. Should a woman who presents as masculine be fired? No. It's okay for that to be, for us to have tolerance for people's gender expression. It's fine. But when you're overrunning and roughshod, running over someone's rights, that is not okay. So it was really, she had really nailed it, like literally on that first night. So the California rep, their head kind of like, California is the place where these kind of ideas go to die. So the fact that she was able to do that as a fellow Californian, I was amazed. And I was like, okay, this strategy is going to work. So I immediately went back to the house, to the Airbnb. And I was like, okay, you know what? This is the plan. Put the lesbians first. I think my strategy is going to work. Let's do that first. So we had put, we were really grateful to a lot of our supporters for getting us these meetings. It was actually really good that they did that. And so we published, like, before we went to Washington, we were like, okay, look at all these great reps that we have meetings with. I've gotten some in California as well, particularly with the Democratic Women's Caucus leader, Cindy Kamlager, who actually used to be a California state rep. And then Irene had gotten one with Congresswoman Ross. These two women were the Democratic Caucus co-chairs for women. The Women's Caucus co-chairs. So we were pretty excited. We were like, hey, all right, let's have this conversation. It's going to be great. And a lot of folks that had booked us meetings with their reps were like, I'm not hopeful. You're not going to move them. They're in the tank, et cetera. I was like, if we don't go to DC and have these conversations, then I don't know how else to do that. I mean, if you don't have these conversations directly, there is no other way. It's great to talk on X. It's great to work across Facebook. It's great to have meetings like this. But if you're not speaking directly to power, you change nothing. You have to get there. You have to go and speak directly to power. So we get to, before we go to DC, we publish, this an email saying, wow, thank you, all of our supporters. Look at all these great meetings you got us. Really appreciate it. And immediately some of those Democratic reps start canceling. And so we're like, what's that about? And I get 2 pings from 2 reporters. One is Brooke somebody, I'm not even gonna mention her name. She's the LGBTQ reporter for The Hill. And if it's not written in The Hill, it didn't happen in Congress. That's sort of basically how this works. The other one is Aaron in the Morning. Have y'all met Aaron in the Morning? Have you seen Aaron in the Morning? So, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Irene. So yeah, we have these like terrible reporters that are in the tank for LGBTQ, and they're basically men LARPing as women. So they wanted to try to get these meetings canceled. So they actually called these congressional reps. This is the state of affairs of things, and I suspect it's not much different in the UK and Australia and other places. The mere appearance of you meeting with someone from the other side, the mere appearance of that is so terrifying that you as an elected official can be canceled. Now, I want you to sit with that for just a minute. I want you to just sit with that for just a minute and recognize these are people that are making decisions about whether or not we're going to fund wars, whether or not we're going to fund, homes for homeless people, healthcare, et cetera. And if they step out of line of this orthodoxy, they get their head cut off. I want to make that very clear that there is that fear. Some of the people that canceled their meetings with us in fear after these reporters started calling them and hounding them and went on Blue Sky and whipped up their followers to also call and hound some of these congressional reps. Some of these are the most powerful people in the country. The most powerful people in the country. And they were afraid to meet with feminists, to meet with lesbians. They were afraid. They actually canceled their meetings with us. That is, including my reps. Sorry, Senator Schiff calling you out. Yep, they did. They immediately bailed on us. That's Arianne's rep as well. Senator Schumer. How many cajillion years has Schumer been in DC? Right, like he's a fossil with a perm in DC, and like he was too afraid to meet with us. Both the Democratic Women's Caucus chairs, Comlager and Ross, bailed on us in fear. Raskin bailed on us in fear. Raskin's also a fossil with a perm. This is the guy that, was part of the January 6 hearings, stood up to some of the toughest people in the world that were supposing to assassinate him. Too afraid to meet with women? Really? So we saw that. We saw these cancellations coming in. We tried to salvage some of these meetings. They gave us no reason at all. And we were like, all right, what are we going to do with this? What are we going to do with this? Yeah, Raskin canceled. We met with Grassley. So what are we going to do with this? And we thought, well, we're going to have some fun with this. So one of the women on the team, I said, can you please get us some rubber chickens? Can you just get us some rubber chickens? She was like, I'll bring you rubber chickens. And we put out a big email blast on it and said, basically Democrats were too afraid to meet. No Republicans canceled. So we went round to their offices and had these rubber chickens, and all of us took pictures under their nameplates with the rubber chickens and said, and we even did a video about it too, like, too afraid to meet with women? Yeah, you could use the tagline, who's afraid of the big bad wolf? But we had a lot more fun with like, really? You're one of the leaders of the free world and you went and hid under your bunny slippers because women came to DC. Thank you, Liz. Yes, we had the chickens. And it was so worth it. So because we ended up with so many meetings, so freaking many meetings, we ended up having to split the team into two parts and really kind of coach them. And if you haven't been to DC, you're going to do a lot of walking. And then we realized that you've got to go through security in every building. And, some senators will be in this building, then others will be in that building, and another will be in that building, et cetera. And so you have to go through security every time until one of the DeSaulnier's office said, go downstairs to the basement. We're like, why? What's in the basement? That's where we found the tunnels, and the tunnels connect all the buildings, and no more going through security and back out on the street and around the corner and past the construction and all of that. So that was a good thing for us to find out. So we were able to move very, very fast underground in DC and meet with a lot of reps. Most of the conversation lasted 30 minutes. And in a lot of cases, what we wanted to do, meeting the reps important, but more important, in America, there's this sort of myth that you vote and that makes you a great citizen. You've done your civic duty. Oh, no. Voting is just the beginning. Once they're in office, whether you voted for them or not, you have to work them like dogs, ladies. I don't know how else to say this to you, but you have to work them like dogs. You have to stay on your elected officials, from your mayor to your congressional rep to your president. You don't just vote for them and go, see you later. Don't forget to write. So hope you have a good time for the next 4 years. No. You have to pound them. That's why I say politics is a full contact sport. You have to be able to go and take some licks, but you also have to be able to go and assert your positions. That means you have to go meet with these representatives. It's absolutely essentially required. It's required. So it was important for us to do this. It was actually required for us to do this. And I will tell you, the response that we got, you can guess what happened with the Republicans, right? We collaborated, but and they were like, "Oh, let me write that law for you, little lady." They were very nice, but the Dems were a tougher case, and there was way more of them to meet with. And I will tell you, there was sort of these, I don't know, 3 lanes that they kind of fell into, or 4 lanes. 1, run scared and hide under your bunny slippers. Okay. 2, throw you out of their office, which happened with Fetterman, who was one of our strongest hopes. And we had a hella team from Pennsylvania that we thought were going to be able to really speak to Fetterman and really move him. If you haven't been watching him, he's one of the guys that's from a purple state, so he needs to work both sides of the aisle. He's made some controversial stands on Israel, immigration, and some other things that have caused the Democratic ranks. And believe me, if you don't already know this, they will burn you to the ground if you don't follow along with their dogma. And so it's interesting. You can be in the left, on the left, criticizing the left from the left, and they automatically assume you've run into the arms of the right. It's like, yeah, no, that didn't happen. I'm just telling you, you're wrong. It's okay. It's okay for us to do that. So with the Dems, like I said, they either, wouldn't meet with you out of fear, or they met with you, and threw you out of their office like Fetterman. Or sometimes we talked with them and you could tell we weren't moving them. And sometimes they would say things like, how much estrogen can the guy take before he's really competitive now with women? They were looking for, where's the line I can draw? Where's the line I can draw? Where's that safety zone? And I sort of knew they were going to be looking for that. That's why I wanted the lesbians to lead, because I didn't want them to feel it anyway safe. I wanted them to realize like how deleterious this is. But there were a lot of Dems that we met with that had this reaction. After hearing from the lesbians and how horrible they've been treated, some of these folks said, I didn't know this. I had no idea. Gillibrand's team was especially instructive. They said, no one's ever come to this office and explained this to us before. We had no idea. And right, again, we had that first test run with the California rep. And that's when Arianne and I really felt like we had the right, I was like, Arianne, this is the right message. We have to just drill it. Luckily, half the team was lesbians. Like we have to just drill this home, that we have got to drill this home, that they are actively hurting a group that they purport to support, and they have no freaking idea. So we worked that. And there's an act proceeding through Congress now, which is the Equality Act, which is dead in the water. It's not going to go anywhere. But some of the Dems asked us, how could you amend the act so that it would not create the conditions that you're describing? How can you give us amendments? At that point, when people are asking you to help them write legislation or give them amendments, you've hit political gold. That's what you really want. That's exactly what you really want. And you want them to call you someday and ask you, like, hey, I'm thinking about this legislation. What do you think about it? Can you help me write this legislation? Et cetera. So that was like the political gold mine that I wanted us to stumble into, is when they're asking you to help with legislation. So we're like,
And
yes,
Sharon,
we'll get to the amendments.
yeah,
So
I was gonna
there
say
you
too, I
go.
thought it was really helpful how y'all had laid out like this those pieces of paper with like, here are the executive orders that are related to the goals that we have for our organizations. And then here's like where you could make it into legislation. Like here's what we need you to actually codify and take further. And here, and you would always like, we would do, I thought we did a good job of starting with, where we have common ground, just acknowledging that we weren't going to agree on everything, but starting with whatever common ground we could find, and then saying, here's, could you push him or her on these things to get this into legislation? So I thought
We
I thought we got better as we went at kind of like honing in on our common ground and then like pushing them further and leaving them with handouts that they could take. And
we had done that. And I think that we also, the finding the common ground thing was a huge part of this, right? Because coming into this, every single US senator and every congressional, except for two, had voted for the Take It Down Act. And if you don't know what the Take It Down Act, it's a great piece of legislation that was bipartisan. Cruz and Klobuchar put it forward, and it forces people to take down non-consensual sexual images, right? That within like 72 hours. I mean, it's a great piece of legislation. So we were able to start off thinking listen, when you catch somebody doing something good, you pat them on the head because you want them to keep doing it, right? Right. So we had found this one piece of legislation that is very much in Wolf's wheelhouse of policy, which is anti-porn. And we could thank every single rep that we met with for voting for the Take It Down Act, every single one. So we started from trying to find that place where something that we could all agree on, something that we all felt like, okay, this was a good, like, let's start there and build the relationship. So we didn't come in hammering them across the head. We actually spent time like trying to build a relationship, because what we really wanted to do is again, have that relationship so that they would be able to call us and say, how do you fit, what do you think about this legislation? Could you help us write model legislation? Could you help us pass legislation? So it was a really good experience. I want to introduce my compadres here. So Irene from WDI, one of the first people that I called, and Irene was like, I'll totally do this. I'm totally coming. Liz, who's in New York, the New York women have been very, very tough and very strong supporters of Women's Liberation Front. And we love seeing them get organized. So Liz came with, she used to be on our board. And then Arianne, as soon as I met her, I was like, kindred soul. And she was great. So Arianne, if you wouldn't mind, could you give a little bit of the speech that you gave to these congressional reps? Because it was used to devastating effect.
We have this group, LGBTQ, but a lot of people in the L feel like we've been marginalized, and we feel like we've been left out by the whole alphabet soup. And there have been all sorts of cases, and I've spoken to lesbians of all generations who've talked about this problem of heterosexual men who call themselves lesbians, who identify into our spaces. And it might seem like that these men are a small percentage of a population, but lesbians are a small percentage of the population. And we have a long history of men trying to wrangle their way into our spaces. And this is why women's only spaces are such a problem for us, why we need women's only spaces, and why the eradication of women's only spaces is not good for us. So please listen to lesbians. And you know what? This is something that's really weird. I come from one of the most liberal parts of the country. In fact, I think I am in the most liberal congressional district in the country. And I am really shocked by the number of lesbians I've met from here and from all over the country who have actually voted Republican for the first time in their life because they are so disappointed by the Democrats on this issue.
They didn't seem to know anything about how gender ideology is affecting lesbians in particular and how that's making us want to leave the party. They didn't seem to know about the porn aspect, about why that's making a lot of girls and young women want to become non-binary.
Yep.
They didn't know about porn affecting, AGP men. There was like just a lot of the gender ideology, the kind of the darker aspects of it that just had not occurred to them at all.
Yeah, and also one thing that got a lot of Democrat aid oohs and oh, that's so weird. It was when we brought up the pathway that like internalized homophobia can play in encouraging lesbians to transition. I noticed a lot of Democrats seemed, oh wow, that's really interesting. So that was a point we brought up. as we went on, I mean, we really do have to scope out like who are the particular people in question. When we did the Mark Kelly aides, one of the Mark Kelly aides was I guess non-binary. She went by they them pronouns. And it was her and someone who didn't go by they them pronouns. But I was so nervous going into that. I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I want to say? But it actually went well. And I was so grateful for all the different women in the group, because we had people in person and someone called in on phone, and we just we didn't hold back really with that. And it went fairly well. And she tried, there were a couple of times where she was trying to like prod, the non-binary aide was trying to like prod a sort of gotcha question into us. But it kind of, I think, kind of fizzled, and it wasn't actually as hostile of a meeting as I expected it to be. And so that would be like one example of like, well, you just have to test the waters. When I was talking to some Republicans, I wasn't sure how to bring in like, because I'm representing LGB Alliance USA. I'm like, how do I bring in like a gay rights angle to them? And one point that landed well, I think, was I brought up Republican hypocrisy. So if you want to be like, say, for example, against surrogacy, sometimes people will say things like, well, surrogacy, maybe it's okay for married heterosexual couples, but no one else to do it. And that point, I made a point that's going to work. People are going to call that's homophobic. When you say like it's not okay for gay people to do it, but it's okay for straight couples to do it, people are going to say you're homophobic, and they're not going to listen to you. So I made a point with Republicans, if you want to, particularly with a couple of the female Republicans who seem to care about that issue, you really want to take a stand against surrogacy, you're going to have to do so consistently. So that would be an example of how I was trying to bring that a sort of a more gay rights angle to Republicans. I would also say one thing that occurred to me while talking to going through all these representatives and their aides and stuff was no one seemed to know what the HHS report was. So that was the report that a few months ago was released by the Department of Health and Human Services. That was sort of like the American CAS review. Totally torpedoed the science behind transgender medicine, particularly for minors. And I was surprised that no one, Democrat or Republican, knew what that was. So I made sure every meeting that I plugged that report.
I don't think they knew about the CAS report either, though. I mean, they
No,
yeah.
they didn't.
Oh no, yeah.
No. And I think you're pointing out something. This, like I said, I think this was the revelation for all of us, is that you can, like I say, hang out on Twitter and Facebook, whatever, and talk amongst yourselves, and you assume that elected officials know these things. And we found out, no, they don't. You actually have to go sit down and talk with them. You have to go and make your case, and talk with them. And I want you to know, this is not a one and done kind of thing, right? So like when we got back from DC, I wrote emails to everybody that we met with. We got 1 million freaking business cards, right? So the business cards is where, it's like, that's the goal. You want all these business cards from all these reps and their legislative aides, because that's who's doing the heavy lifting, is the legislative aid staff. So we wanted to make those relationships with them. When we got back, wrote everybody thank you letters, and we are going to continue to pester and call them. Women's Liberation Front has some tech that we use, which enables you to contact your representative. So as soon as we started getting those cancellations, we put on email blast to our supporters and said, hey, would you contact your representatives and get us some meetings? And by the way, feel free to berate the ones that canceled it. It is so gratifying to watch so many women and men clicking that button. And we were watching Tammy Duckworth get hit, and we were watching Schumer get hit. We were watching Schiff get hit. People that had booked those meetings for us that were constituents had no fear of calling those representatives and letting them know how damn disappointed they were. I want to say that in the Mark Kelly meeting, that was very, very instructive. He's an Arizona senator. He's very powerful. And I appreciated Arianne's very level, 13 women sitting in a room, right? That was a packed meeting. And she's right. There were 2 women meeting with us that were their legislative aides. One made a big show of being non-binary, The other female was smart, took a freaking load of notes and asked really good questions. It wasn't enough because one of our senior lesbian supporters was actually on the phone, who's Mark's constituent from Arizona. And she went ahead and let him have it. Let that team have it and said, you know what? This is why you're losing elections, this is why you're going to continue to lose elections. You know, this is a problem. And Dawn could see their face, Dawn on the phone couldn't see their face, but we were in the room, we could see their face. And the woman taking the notes, like you could see that her stomach dropped into her shoes. Like they know this is a problem. They know. Now I want you to know we had some fun too. Senator Tammy Duckworth, who should have met with us, should have, and initially took the meeting, again, booked by one of her constituents out of Illinois. Duckworth is amazing. She's one of those women you want to hang out with. Veteran of Iraq, got her legs shot off in the Iraq War, tough as freaking nails, had babies while in the Senate using IVF, and installed a breastfeeding, breast pumping station in the Senate building in recognition of women who have to do that, have to attend to the business of being women. So I was super excited to meet her. Like I thought she was going to be a rock star. Nope, canceled, went and hid under the rug. So we actually went to, we took the picture under the Duckworth, nameplate with the chickens and all that. Arianne and I both did it because we were like, we really felt like she should be an amazing one to meet with. And the next day, we happened to be on that same floor, saw her office, and Margot, my vice president, and I decided, you know what, we're going to pop by. And we had these cool postcards that were like, hey, we'd like to talk to you about women's rights. I have Wolf's 4 issues on them. Walked in, and the 26-year-old, when you walk in these offices, everyone's 26 sitting at the desk. They've all got interns answering the phone, and their average age, I think, is 25, 20. It's your first job out of college, right? You got to answer the phone for somebody. And so we walked in, this 26-year-old male intern sitting at the desk, and we said, hey, we're the feminists that wanted to meet with you. And, you canceled, and we feel kind of bad about it, but we're just going to pop by so that you can see that we don't breathe fire and won't burst into flames and all that. Don't know what you were so scared of. And we're going to drop a postcard, here, let you know kind of our issues, and just want to say hi, very friendly, all that. So because these offices are made out of glass, you can stand like literally down the hall and like look straight in and see what's happening. So this intern, he gives us this like flat face, takes the postcard. And then as we're watching from, across the walkway, and he literally runs into the back of the office with the postcard, and he's like, like literally has like, this really difficult, I mean, he just has a complete meltdown, and you can tell that the office, exploded into flames.
Muted. I love the blocks. I love that it's what's the word I'm looking for, hiding my identity. That's great. I wanted to talk more about the Mark Kelly meeting, because I know this is just an emotional thing, but everything felt like it was leading up to that meeting, all the practice that we got sitting with reps. And every time we'd go and we'd strategize about what we could have done better. And honestly, I think everybody did a good job, because this is fully grassroots, and I had no political experience before I came in here, and now being pretty much left to run a major human rights movement has been, we all know that the pressure is extreme. So I'm very proud of all the women who did anything with this. I wanted to start out with, but the meeting with Mark Kelly, I feel like that was kind of the end game of what happens when you have no debate, because I think what that non-binary staffer expected is for us to be so thrown off we couldn't do anything. And also she expected us to be motivated by hate. And that's why she wasn't listening to us, because she'd heard that we were a hate group and we wanted her to be rounded up into camps and shot. And what she actually got was a group of pro-women women. What I noticed speaking to people on the street, especially younger women, is they've never actually seen what real feminists are. And I had a similar experience protesting German self-ID laws on the street. A young trans-identified girl came up and talked to us. Like, she came up to 2 lesbians and asked, why do you hate me? And the lesbians were speaking to her for a full 2 hours. Things that she never heard, things like, look, this is me when I was a little girl. I used to be very masculine. And this little girl who was told that we were a hate group was able to sit there and speak with us for 2 to 3 hours. And that staffer sat there and listened to what we had to say. It was kind of magical, because there was not a shred of hate in that room. Everything that she had been told about us was wrong. That is a natural consequence of brainwashing. And that really is what's going on here. As Sharon said, the mechanism of gender ideology is that it is a coercive control movement. It's a cult like Scientology. And the only way to really break through that is on a large scale, show that the punishment that they're so scared of, the problem has become so big now that we're not afraid of doing it. Now, the people that are in charge of us, the people who are supposed to be leading the country, have pushed this extreme social punishment of going up against a cult that has taken over, that has subsumed a major political party, are leaving their constituents to deal with the problem that they're too afraid to. And they need to, even if they won't listen to us, we need to apply that pressure, because they need to know that because of their cowardice, regular women, regular professional women who come from different backgrounds, are now having to eat the thing that they can't. It is horrific that they're forcing us to do this. And we have to stand strong and together and keep applying that pressure, even if we think that they're not listening, because they need to know what they're. That's my take on this.
We got to do this again and again and again. We had 13 really amazing women and 2 that trained in, right, to be with us. So we had women from across the country on this, and helped us book these meetings. And I will tell you, we're going to do this again next year. We need 100 women. And we need to do 500 meetings, right? So like, we know, and we need to take a week, right, to do it. Like, this is a crap ton of effort to pull off like 20 plus meetings with some key folks, right? So we need to do this better. For the, I see Melissa and some others in the chat, I am not willing to just give up on somebody. And if I thought voting would fix this, I would be in the business of getting people elected, which was the business I was in before I came to Women's Liberation Front. Like I say, you have to work them like dogs while they're in office. That is the job. And sometimes they don't want to talk to you. And it doesn't matter whether you voted for them or not. Doesn't even matter if you like them or not. We met with some people that I wanted to go take a shower with after, I wanted to like immediately go take a shower and like scrub myself free afterwards, because you just know they were, my own congressional rep is one of these. I'm just like, he's awful, but that's the job. You have to go work them like dogs. So we will do this again. We want to bring more women with us next year. I will tell you this again, you've got to be thick skinned. If you haven't worked in politics, this is probably not for you, but if you have worked in politics, if you've got a thick skin, if you can speak, and if you can stay on point and not be derailed and not burst into tears when they don't agree with you, this is totally for you. So see me after. I want more recruits. I want to bring more women with us. I am so appreciative of these women that were with me. I appreciate Dr. Fedak. I appreciate, Irene so much. Irene, you've done a few things with us now, and I've really enjoyed, like just your steady, calm, like and you're tough. I appreciate how tough you are. And then Arianne, what a rock star. Once I figured out Arianne could really make a hella speech and was so devastating with her point, and they were really good, concise points, put her front and center. So again, it was a strange strategy to try. Some people looked at me and they're like, really, you're going to lead with the lesbians? Yeah, absolutely. I am. And it turned out with the Dems, it was the best thing we could have done. They had no freaking idea to have won.
We want to have, like Sharon said, a lot more meetings and probably smaller meetings. We had a lot of, we ended up having a lot of bigger meetings because some canceled, but I think we want to be, really, really, really focused and smaller. And we want women to contact their reps to set meetings, because usually it has to be a constituent. So yeah, we want a lot more women and more meetings next year.
So if you could maybe talk about some next steps, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a every Monday call where we are tracking legislation across the country and in DC. And so we have a target list of bills, just an FYI. And I know that WDI is very focused on gender, but Wolf also is very focused on porn, prostitution, and reproductive rights. So we track bills in all those directions at the state level and also at the federal level. Anyone's welcome to join that call. Welcome volunteers. We got some star volunteers that are taking care of watching a lot of that legislation. And what we do is we end up putting in comments on those bills. We end up doing testimony on those bills. In fact, I kept running into Irene and Arianne in those hearings in different states, right, testifying on bills that we all cared about. And I was like, why don't we just do one legislative call and work together on this and team up? And so we are. So anyone's welcome to join that call and get involved in legislation. So that's one big question. The other is, yeah, the goal of this trip was more to start those working relationships, right? So we did have a sheet that was, here's all the legislation, here's what's pro-woman, and here's what's not. right? And so we're watching that legislation at the federal level. So we will be watching those bills, but we also want to get in contact, have this ongoing relationship with these representatives. So the good news is, yeah, we just established 21 relationships. We need 500, right? So like, that's how you really change things, because that's how many reps there are, right? So that's how you really change things. So more is better. We want to do more of that. And then, yes, we will do a spring trip every year. Some folks are trying to push us now to do an October trip. I will also tell you, to my delight and surprise, I could not believe our donors fully funded the whole thing. I couldn't believe it. I honestly. And so that told me that there was a lot of energy for this, and that, they wanted us to do this. They wanted us to have these relationships with power. The other thing I will tell you is I've also lobbied members of parliament in the UK. By the way, I'm a dual national. So it's not as hard as you think. They actually will respond to your emails. The important thing is, like I say, you have to work with the rep while they're in office. You have to keep the pressure on. Do you not know that that's what the other side did? Right? They cowed them, and they worked them, and they had paid people to go and do this. Right? We were all a bunch of volunteers. I mean, I'm paid staff, but everybody else was a volunteer. So, you have to have like this force that mobilizes, that lets them know that things are not. They've got some people shouting in their ears, with megaphones, and the assumption is that that is what the public thinks. That is not what the public thinks. And it's really important for constituents to bring that message and to bring groups like us forward with them, groups like LGB Alliance, WDI, who can give them that counter view and say, this isn't what the public thinks. This isn't popular. Stop it. And it was really important that we did that. So
I want to give a quick shout out to LGB Courage Coalition, which is doing some absolutely amazing work at the state level in particular. The LGB Courage Coalition has really been focused on bills to protect children from wrong sex hormones and puberty blockers, but they also care about all of the issues that all of us care about. So they're doing some really great work.